Hello, welcome back to Zestology. Today, a man who's been a medical doctor for 30 years, more recently a specialist on getting the best out of yourself, on high performance, on mental game and dealing with stress. Extremely relevant then at this particular time, it is one of my best friends and a regular guest on Zestology, Dr. Steve. And today, we're just focusing on getting through this. We can do this. In this podcast, we talk on concentrating on our mission in these tough times, dealing with fear and anxiety, and why fear and anxiety are not the same thing. We talk about switching off, a regular theme on this podcast and harder to do than ever. And Dr. Steve asks me some awkward questions on how much I've been switching off or not, and how late I've been switching off in the evening. I mean, the news is just so stimulating at the moment, isn't it? I mean, this week has been so extraordinary that sometimes I find when I should be asleep, I'm still hoovering up my phone. So we talk a little bit about that and loads more as well. Hope you enjoy this podcast. I hope you and everybody that you know and love is safe and well. It is a very weird time at the moment, isn't it? And there's no sign of it ending anytime soon. So, as I've already said on these podcasts, the original schedule has gone out the window. I had some great guests, including Dr. Chris Shade and Dr. Andrew Hill, but they will be here, and they'll be here quite soon as well. But in the meantime, I wanted to record a few of these special podcasts, including a person who is an absolutely perfect guest for this time. It is Dr. Steve on Zestology. Dr. Steve, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well, Tony, and I'm glad to be able to say that in the current times.
I know, yeah. It's really nice to catch up. Obviously, the last few podcasts we've recorded in person, but it's nice to see your face on Skype, and I'm sure people will enjoy hearing you as well. How are you doing in this lockdown there? As you say, you're doing okay. You're physically healthy, and thank goodness for that. Perhaps firstly, I should say congratulations, because since lockdown, you've become a grandfather.
I have indeed. It's a first experience for me, and I'm still getting used to it. So a week ago, I think a week today, actually.
It's absolutely brilliant news. Huge congratulations to you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
How are you getting on then with lockdown and obviously not being in the same place as your grandson?
Well, that's hard. I mean, I wasn't planning to be there anyway, because I thought it was important for my daughter and my son-in-law to have time together and get to familiar with the baby and make their bonding, all those things. But my wife was planning to go back in about a month's time, and possibly I'd have gone with her. But of course, that's all off now. There's no flights running, or I think if you're lucky enough to get into Australia, I think you have to go into quarantine for 2 weeks. So it's just not viable. So but that's the way that it is. And there are many, many people who are facing far more serious issues than that. So I'm not moaning about that. That's just something we accept. But we have the wonders of technology. I've seen little videos, I've seen the photos, and she's almost as good.
Oh, yeah. It's funny, this whole situation that we're in at the moment, isn't there? Because I think the overriding feeling, which a lot of people have said, is if you were to take away that kind of undercurrent of anxiety that we all feel about the global situation and the fact that a lot of people are getting ill and people close to us might get ill. If you take that away, there are some good things, aren't there, about being in lockdown, about being able to appreciate each other's company and cooking a massive amount of food and that one brief bit of exercise that we're allowed a day, going out and really noticing and appreciating nature. There are certain positives to slowing down, weirdly.
There are, and it almost makes you feel guilty to recognize that. But as long as we remember all of the terrible things that are going on, I think if we can embrace some of the positive, even if they're small positives, I think that'll help us get through to the other side. So I think it's important. Yeah. And of course, they use everything's a cliche now. They're saying these are unprecedented times. But I mean, the truth is that it is. I mean, I've not known anything like this in my lifetime. So, and people say this goes back, since to the Second World War. So, and I'm sure they're right. And in particularly for the younger people who are used to this mobility, the social mobility and networking with friends and all that kind of stuff. I mean, being cooped up in lockdown. I mean, families with young kids, how living in what a 1 or 2 bedroom flat in the middle of London or Birmingham or
Yeah.
somewhere. I mean, how on earth are they coping?
I know. It is so terribly unfair in so many ways, isn't it?
In what way do you mean unfair, Tony? I mean, I think I know what you mean.
I mean, whatever stage of life you're at, this isn't easy. You know, you just become a grandfather, and you're not going to see your grandson for a while.
Yeah.
Teenagers who are in their last term of school can't hang out with their friends. I remember when I was that age, all I wanted to do was hang out with my friends, and I couldn't imagine being cooped up with my parents for however long it is. And then obviously on a socio-economic scale, as you say, if you're cooped up in a flat with no garden, this is even worse than if you've got a garden.
Mm.
I mean, I'm just thinking in terms of your experience as a doctor. You, as we've discussed on the podcast before, had a very eclectic set of jobs, didn't you, as a doctor? And you travelled all around the world. I think you lived in Kazakhstan, many different places in Asia and Africa as well.
Nigeria, Angola in Africa. Angola for 7 years during the civil war there. That was
Were there
some
any
ways probably there.
viral outbreaks when you were there as well?
Well, there certainly were. I mean, it started off with HIV because when I think I was really first, more or less, first started working in Africa, where that was becoming a big issue, and of course, that's a virus. And then in 2003, when I was in Angola, we had a huge Ebola epidemic. And in fact, I think that is still the world's largest. To be technically correct, it was actually Marburg, which is a variant of Ebola, but it's actually it's even more deadly. So I saw that at first hand. And since then, we've had SARS, and part of my role was to, apart from being hands-on, was to prepare teaching materials and give briefings to senior management and stuff like that. And particularly when we were talking about SARS, I was giving these presentations to a group of managers in London, and they were falling asleep. I mean, they just thought, oh, here we go again. This is Y2K again, and here's an expert, trying to get us all frightened, and it'll never happen. Well, I'm sorry, but I said that, then, and I say now, it will happen. We know that some of the deadliest diseases on the planet are not going to be from bacteria or from funguses. They're going to be from viruses over which we have very, very little control. Never have done and don't have very much now.
What we do have control over, and I think this is interesting in bearing in mind what you've done since your medical career, is our response to the lack of control. We can only control what we can control, which is probably a bit of a cliche, but we can, in some ways, control our stress response. We can control how much news we consume. We can do the things that we know work for us. I mean, in terms of the mental effects of the viruses that you saw at first hand in Angola, for example, and the stress that it caused, what did you observe?
Well, I mean, stress is. I can't think of a word. That doesn't do it justice. I mean, it was harrowing, heartbreaking, seeing what was happening, and I mean, we had sometimes close to 100% infection rates, transmission through a family, and the death rate was close to 100%. So this is whole families, whole communities being decimated. And not only that, but there was the socio-cultural issues. Like, I mean, as soon as WHO and others came in to try and control this epidemic, there were certain rules that had to be put in place, far more draconian than what we're living in lockdown now. And one of those is that sick children were separated from their parents. Now, life in Africa is very close. It's very touchy. People are always hugging and kissing and all the other things that probably we don't do enough of in normal times. But to not to be able to embrace their children and even to embrace the dead bodies, after poor kid has died. I mean, this was incredibly difficult to implement, and of course there was some rioting and stuff like that. But Well, I don't, it's upsetting me to even think about it, quite
Yeah,
honestly. It's
yeah.
2003, but even just talking about it now, it brings it all back. So, let's just say it was really, really bad, Tony.
Mm. It just does sound harrowing, and it makes you
Mm.
realise how difficult it is to, inverted commas, be positive when there's very little to be positive about.
Yeah.
Is there anything on a slightly more optimistic note that you did notice or you have reflected on since that can help us through these kind of, because it is so kind of strange and uncertain, isn't it, at the moment? And I think, I mentioned that kind of low level anxiety that we've all got at the moment, even in the times when you kind of, and we've just watched Tiger King on Netflix,
Mm.
and it's just wonderful escapism, and for an hour I just didn't think about anything else. And at the end
Yeah.
of the hour, I was like, oh yeah, all that's going on. And I feel really anxious for members of my family and the wider community and all sorts of other things. But for that hour, I did manage to switch off. And I do think that's important. Even, it's important to empathise with the awful trauma and suffering that's going on in the world, but not 24 hours a day, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. Well, you're right. And one of the things you said when you introduced this kind of topic was, we have to be positive and positive thinking. I mean, you weren't recommending it, but you're just saying how difficult it is. As a coach, I find that expression to be absolutely valueless. I mean, people use it all the time. Be positive.
Yeah.
I mean, it's okay. I don't mind saying, look on the bright side, because as soon as anybody says to me, look on the bright side, I think of Monty Python and I start laughing, when they're singing the song.
Yeah.
But funnily enough, about a month ago, and I don't really know what prompted me to do this, I started to think it's time for me to get some blogs and videos out. And I don't do it I'm not disciplined like you. I do these things on a weekly basis. I just do them when I feel an urge. And I was getting a sense of what was going on around the world. And so I thought, okay, my first blog is going to be about fear. And fear is one of the deepest sort of what I call reptile emotions that we have, and it's to do with survival. If anybody threatens our life, our family, takes away our money, burns our house to the ground, stuff like that, we react sort of very spontaneously. And there are some people in society who want people to be frightened because it actually makes them easier to manipulate in a Machiavellian type way. And I'm not saying that this is happening right now, but what I am saying is that there are people who know how to get society wound up. So I think the first point I made is that the more you can understand why you're thinking, that allows you to start building in elements of control. Just like you were saying, you feel a little bit anxious about stuff. You watch Tiger King, and it takes your mind to a different place. So with fear, a starting point is understand that there's a difference between fear and anxiety. Fear is very much in the moment. And generally speaking, the times that I've been in what you would call a fearful situation, and that would be with bullets flying, or I've been something like that in Africa, something going on, or even as an emergency surgeon when somebody with devastating injuries is brought in, and it's up to you.
Yeah.
The mind actually goes sort of quite blank, and you definitely don't feel fear. Actually, it could be addictive, and there are people in emergency services who get addicted to this buzz, this endorphin thing. People describe it as like taking a drug because the world suddenly becomes simple. You think a lot faster, but actually it feels like you're thinking really slow. And I think athletes say a similar thing about when they're in the zone. So fear as such, to me, it's almost always mistaken when it really is anxiety. And anxiety is not in the moment. Anxiety is when you're, feeling not so good on the inside because you're thinking, oh God, what if I get ill? What if my family get ill? What if the world turns upside down? I mean, there's no end of fear subjects or anxiety things that people can come up with.
Yeah.
Some people say this is the what if syndrome, because as soon as you identify one anxiety, you knock it on the head, but then another one comes in. But oh, well, what if this happens? What if this happens? That is a game that never ever goes anywhere. So if once we know that, then that will take us to another step and say, okay, well, obviously, if there's something in the future, there's really not much I can do about it. I mean, I can do sensible preparations. I can make sure if we're going to have lockdown, that I got all my videos that I want and all the music and the food and the vitamins and, you name it, all those gadgets that we can't do without these days. But other than that, I don't know whether I'm going to get this virus or not. And if I do get it, I don't know whether it's going to be mild or more serious. I don't know. But I don't waste a lot of time thinking about it, really. And in a way, I think people in a war environment, when we hear people talking about their war experiences, that is, they often say, well, we're more grateful. We see life in a different way. We see it in a sharper, more focused way, because every day we're here on the planet, we want to make the most of it. And people who get over this, and in fact, I saw a man on the TV a couple of hours ago. He was being applauded by the staff because he'd gone through the ventilator and he walked out still sick but surviving, and he was interviewed and he said, I can't believe how different I feel. I'm just so grateful for everything.
Yeah.
All the things that we take for granted.
Just interrupting this podcast for one moment to remind you that it is brought to you by my podcast partners, and that is Bioptimizers. If you suffer from digestive issues like gas or bloating or cramping, even when you think you're eating healthy stuff and then you just kind of feel bloated afterwards, that was me for 20 years, and I'm really happy that I'm starting to sort that out. But you think you're eating healthy, nutritious foods, but it's not quite going down the way that it should do. You could benefit from a high-quality enzyme, and you can check out Bioptimizer's high-quality enzyme, which is called Masszymes. And their focus is on you optimizing your biology, which is why they're called Bioptimizers. Masszymes is a full-spectrum enzyme formula. It's got more protease than any other commercially available formula, 5 different kinds, and it also contains all the other key enzymes that you need for optimal digestion. It's one of the strongest enzyme formulas in the industry. And if you fancy finding out more, you can head to bioptimizers.com/zestology. Remember, though, to use the code Zestology10 when you get there. So that's Zestology10. And if you're in the UK, by the way, you need to use the UK site, which is bioptimizers.co.uk, but you can still use that code as well. They're all about optimizing your digestion and making sure that even when you do eat that food that you think is healthy, you don't get that bloating afterwards, because it's not fair, is it? I mean, if you're eating a load of kind of gassy lentils, then I can't help you. But if you're eating something that's kind of genuinely really healthy and quite paleo or a little bit bulletproof, kind of low carb, I mean, the kind of thing we're talking about in this podcast and loads of podcasts that you'll listen to on Zestology, it's then a bit gutting if you don't feel great afterwards. And that's where Bioptimizers can help. So it's bioptimizers.com/Zestology or bioptimizers.co.uk and use the code Zestology10. Back to the podcast. Yeah, what a wake-up call it is. And just being able to switch off is, I think, more important than ever. I mean, I've been talking a bit over the last few days about, because the news is so dreadful, it's very hard to switch off at night before going to sleep. And I don't think the quality of my sleep has been particularly good, because every evening there's different developments, and sometimes it might change by the hour as well. I mean, that's how serious everything goes, and that makes switching off all the more important, but it's harder to do.
Well, okay, so let's have some honesty here, Tony. How successful are you at switching your news off in the evening, say from 6 p.m. onwards?
Oh, I mean, from 6 p.m. onwards, completely unsuccessfully. But then everyone kind of draws up their own parameters. And I think mine are less kind of rigorously observed than they were a couple of years ago. I tell you what else really kind of did for that, and that is having a baby, where you might be up, I mean, when for the first few months, we were just like, one of us would sleep 9 till 3 and one of us would sleep 3 till 9. And if you're up at 3 o'clock in the morning with nothing to do but a baby that is kind of asleep on you, so you can't go to sleep yourself, you've got to amuse yourself somehow. All that said, I'm not making any excuses. But just to say that when I do manage to switch off and pick up a book, for example, or watch Tiger King or whatever it might be, I do feel better. And I think those are extremely important things to do for everybody at the moment, because if you do get ill, whatever it might be, the one thing you need is a really good immune system, your parasympathetic nervous system kicked in, and to be nice and relaxed to let your immune system do its work properly and well. And you're not going to be doing that if you're really super stressed.
You are so much truth in what you just said then. Yeah. Now, a lot of people will argue me when I say this, but I think millions of years of evolution have gone into us as human beings. I mean, they say human beings as we know have only been around like 400,000 years or even less than that. People can't really agree where's the cutoff between this person being more sort of ape-like or Neanderthal, and when did they become Homo sapiens? But it goes back further than that, because we've inherited genes from our predecessors, the species that preceded us, and we can see that in our anatomical structures. We can see that some people have sort of blockages in the throat, which are actually part of the gill system that fish would have had. That's an evolutionary throwback. But so I think because of all of that, I think the default state for a human being is not to live in fear and not to live in anxiety. I don't think that's our natural state. I think that's a state of mind that our environment and that other circumstances have driven us to. And one of the reasons why I say that is I find huge cultural differences. Having spent most of my life living abroad in what we would call challenging locations where people are pretty, under-resourced and underprivileged, I find that their state of mental health is actually better than what I see in the West, where mental health is, it's a graph that's just going sky high at the best of times, let alone now. And that is because, I don't know what the difference is, but in places like Africa, there are real things to worry about. And I think there is that's when our evolution kicks in, or our behaviors or inherited behaviors or whatever kick in, because it really is sometimes a matter of survival.
Yeah.
And this is the first real sort of global threat to our survival that most people have ever experienced. So that's why there's so much anxiety.
Yeah. I mean,
but it doesn't have to be like that. There are some things we can do, and you mentioned the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. I mean, I don't know whether. I hope we're still on subject, Tony. Tell me if I'm not. But I mean, there's plenty of evidence to show that practices like meditation help people.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
I think you've interviewed somebody on your show recently, Wim Hof. Is that correct? Did you mention that to me?
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Well, when I was in Sydney, beginning of December, I spent a day with him. He was doing one of his group events.
Oh, did you? Great.
I did. Yeah, and I did the ice bath.
Oh, right.
Great. And all the other things that we do. But I mean, the point that he would make is that if you put the body under the stress of an ice bath. And this is a guy who meditates for hours on end in snowdrifts and stuff like that, and dives into icy water. I mean, climbs mountains in his shorts. I mean, anybody who's interested, look at his videos on YouTube. He's crazy as a coot. But I think he looks pretty healthy. I think he makes some good points. So I still go along and I do the cold shower in the morning, and he would say, well, that helps you to balance, to reset the sympathetic and the parasympathetic.
Great.
And I don't know whether it does or not, but I'm still doing it every day since I had his training.
Great. And how long do you do it for?
The cold shower, the honest truth here, 30 seconds.
Well, that's pretty good. Do you go warm and then slowly make it cold?
No, I go warm. I have a normal hot shower, and I'm
Yeah,
thinking, oh, I'm loving this, loving this. Then I bravely just seize the hot water and switch it off instantly,
great.
and I try not to scream because it upsets the neighbours. But you do get used to it actually, and if I don't have it, I kind of miss it.
Well, that also ties in with the fact that we are just. When you said this is the biggest, the reason we're also anxious because it's the biggest shock that many of us and the biggest threat that many of us have faced in our lifetimes. And actually, perhaps we're not as resilient as we might be because we have so many creature comforts. We live in we live in 21-degree temperatures all year round that never really gets that cold or warm. We have lovely air conditioning or heating in our houses, and in terms of we never have to go without food, for example. We don't even have to fast if we don't want to. And all these sort of things perhaps mean that we're not that resilient to shocks and anxiety and threats. And the idea behind the cold showers is that it makes you more physically resilient.
It is, and I probably should say, by the way, health warning here: don't have a cold shower, before if you've got any kind of medical problem or you want to
Yeah.
discuss it with your doctor. I would not recommend you go straight into cold showers, um, for certain. But again, if I could take issue with you, Tony, and again, there'll be loads of people here who wouldn't agree with me. I think we're resilient. I think we are greatly resilient. In fact, I believe that every one of us is a lot more resilient than we give ourselves credit for. Because when I was doing this series of blogs, I started to dig around, and I wanted to, this is a good NLP technique. If you want to learn how to do something like show more resilience or something like that, find people who were put under extreme pressure and what were the strategies that they allowed them to get through the other side. And the two ones that resonated particularly strongly with me and that I've written about before was Frankl. He was the Austrian doctor
Yes.
whose whole family was wiped out in the concentration camps in the Second World War, and he wrote a book about his experiences. And then there's another one, a similar incident, like prisoner of war. It's called Stockdale. Stockdale, I think, was the most senior officer captured during the Vietnam War, treated atrociously and tortured and starved and all the rest of it, and he survived. And he was interviewed. His answers led this writer to say this is the Stockdale paradox, because what both Frankl and Stockdale shared in common was they both had a faith that they were going to come through this. That's the first thing. They had a faith. Now, there's a difference between a faith and hope. A hope, we like to live in hope, but hope is a pretty weak antidote to fear. But faith is much stronger if you can find faith from somewhere. And the second thing is they said, but neither must you live in cloud cuckoo land. You have to embrace the reality of the situation that you're in, because that is probably not going to change for a while. So you have to accept, yes, this is tough. You have to accept that I can get through this, and then the faith comes in. So, Stockdale was interviewed. He said, and the person said to him, he said, "Can you tell the people who are going to survive this and the ones that weren't going to do well?" And he said, "Yeah, definitely." He said it was the optimists. And the interviewer said, "What, you mean the optimists were successful and managed to last through this?" He said, "No, quite the opposite." He said the opposites, sooner or later, their heart would be broken. Because you would hear the optimists in the cell next to me, and they'd be saying, this stupid war is going to be over by Christmas. We're all going to be home by Christmas. We just got to dig in deep and we'll be back with our families before you know it. And Christmas came and went, and then Easter, and then the summer holidays, and then Thanksgiving, and then the next Christmas. And sooner or later, they just couldn't take any more of this because all of their hope of an early release were just dashed.
Right. So we don't want to be optimists, but presumably we don't want to be pessimists either.
No, we don't. We definitely don't, because there can be little shreds of hope in any given situation. You must have to clutch at some really, really small straws. But again, people will say there will even on occasions be humor in situations like that. Not a lot of humor, not a lot of people laughing,
Yeah.
but little things that slightly interrupt the awful rhythm of the typical day that people are
Yeah.
going through.
So what was Stockdale's message then? Was it to kind of
He said to have faith in. I mean, I'm paraphrasing his
yes.
words here, but it's something like you have to find faith in something. And Frankel said
Yeah.
in something or somebody. So you have to have a reason,
Yes.
a reason to have faith and a reason to want to survive. And Frankel put it more simply. He said, "There's just two things. You have to have faith in another. You have to deeply love another person, or you have to be deeply attached to a project that you wish to complete, or preferably both." And I think Stockdale would have said, I think that he was a religious person. I'm not certain about that. But certainly a lot of people have a very strong religious faith that they get strength from. People get strength from the commitment to their families or to their community or to their country. There's endless sources of faith that are there that people have used through the ages.
Yeah.
So I would say, well, like all things, I'll say try any of these things, because sooner or later we might find something that helps us.
Yeah, I've been mulling starting a book club over the last few weeks on my on this podcast and on my blog as well, and I did a vote and asked people, if I'm going to start a book club, would you rather read escapist fiction, because we all need a kind of a little bit of escapism at the moment, or non-fiction, because we all need a bit of inspiration at the moment? And fiction won by quite a distance. This is great, actually. So I've just started it today. Steve, or as people who listen to this a few days previously. So I've picked a book that is kind of escapist but fairly upbeat, and it's called The Humans by, I think it's Matt Haig. I don't know if you've read it, but it was a Sunday Times bestseller, and it's about an alien who comes down to Earth. And I think it's quite nice because I've been reading it so far, and I take full responsibility if the book is dreadful, by the way. But I've read the kind of first few pages, and it is fantastic. And I have to say, the last couple of nights, with the news being so depressing and so dire, and feeling so much empathy for people, when I have managed to switch off and read a few pages of the book, it has provided quite a support to my kind of mental outlook, whether it's in the evening or the morning, whenever I pick up that book. So I hope that provides a little bit of help for people being part of a book club. I don't really know how it's going to work, but we can all meet up and chat about it in a few weeks' time on Zoom or something like that.
Well, the very fact that people are are involved in some kind of collaborative project like this and able to exchange views with other people, things like that, they will help. Definitely, for sure. It takes people outside their own heads. That's what we have to do. Find a way to get outside our own head.
Yeah. Steve, as always, it's great to talk to you. And I know you've been finding plenty of kind of joy in your natural surroundings as well, haven't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I find my escape in nature. I'm obsessed with nature and always have been, and the miracles of nature. And when I kind of do any even superficial meditation around that subject, I realize that I'm just a speck in the sand.
Yeah.
Although it doesn't feel like that, but
but isn't it weird at the moment that this is the most joyous time of the year in terms of nature? Everything is just sprouting out of every corner, and you can't look outside the window, especially as the weather's been nice here the last few days.
I know.
I mean, it's just unbelievable, and there is such a bittersweet nature to it because you can't quite enjoy it in the same way.
No, it's a disappointment, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Add it to the long list of other disappointments that people are having, and worse. But we will get through the other side of this. I mean, if I'd like to end on a note of optimism here. I mean, we went through the other side of Ebola, and SARS, and we will do this.
Yeah.
My wish is that for the sake of future generations, we learn some lessons and we make sure those lessons are never forgotten. And that's what really sort of disappoints me about what we learned the hard way during Ebola in 2003. I'm not sure those messages have been remembered in the right places. I think we're still making a lot of mistakes that we made before. So history goes around in circles. It would be really nice if future generations are a lot more prepared for this than we were.
Yeah, I mean, you'd like to think this is great preparation for a future potentially more deadly pandemic, but as you say, you've been through it already, and the lessons clearly weren't learnt. What I mean, I've asked you this loads of times before. One book and one tip.
Yeah.
Perhaps, I mean, you were obviously mentioning a couple of books there. Viktor Frankl's book. What's it called again?
Man's Search for Meaning.
That's right.
I'm,
Yeah.
I'm sure that he meant to say men and women's search for meaning,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
anyway, that's the title.
Yeah. So that's. I mean, would you? I've read that, and it's been recommended a few times, and it's an incredibly powerful book.
Yeah.
I might read it again. Actually, it's very short, isn't it?
It's a very short book, and I definitely agree with you. It's an unreserved recommendation from both. I think, really. I think everybody should read it.
Yeah. And then what about one tip then, Steve? Come on, let's finish on one tip for living with more energy and vitality in these uncertain, strange times. What are you going to go for?
Well, I'm going to be cautious what I say because it's very difficult to find the right words, really. But actually, I do have a book because for once, Tony, I was prepared and I've got one for you. And it does, in a way, answers this question.
Okay, yeah.
The book is called Rogue Heroes, and it's written by Ben McIntyre. And it is, I believe, the official history of the SAS, the Special Air Service, during the Second World War. And so as such, I can't say that it's escapist, and I can't say that it's going to give you good, warm feelings about life, because it's about army and it's about what goes on in special services and things like that. But the reason why it had a huge impact on me is that one of the central characters was a man called Johnny Cooper. And the strange thing is that actually he was a friend of mine. I met him when I was about 30 in Oman in the Middle East, and I would guess you'd be 30 years older than me. And we became friends. We never actually said very much, but he had a little tiny cottage, not a cottage, more like I forget what the Arab word for it would be, but overlooking the sea. And sometimes after work, when the wives weren't around, I'd go around there and we'd sit and have a beer. And I always enjoyed his company. And I had some problems with my job at one point, and it looked like my job was going to disappear. And the first person who stepped up to try and help me, find another job was Johnny. And he lined up interviews for me to see some influential people for the very next day. And he said, and the first thing we've got to do is we've got to buy you a car because you can't do anything in this country without a car. And he actually took me to a dealer and was going to buy me a car. And I said, well, hold on. Let's just wait and see, how the interviews go. And as it happened, the situation resolved and I didn't need that. But there was a guy who, and when reading through his book where he was mentioned so much, I mean, he was in action behind enemy lines pretty much the whole time of the Second World War. Many of the people that he worked with were killed and they were tortured and all the other terrible things that go on. And so there's a person who really knows stuff about fear. And I was, because I knew him, I kind of got into that part quite a bit because I've done some military training as well. And he said, he said people used to think that we didn't have fear, that we were fearless and reckless and all the rest of it. He said we don't. We all had fear, but we were all able to put it into a different part of our brain, and we concentrated on the mission. So, what would my tip for today? I would say to people, concentrate on your mission. Do what Johnny did, whatever your mission might be. Now, well, I guess I've got lots of ambitions, but one of them is I want to see my grandson. So, whatever it takes, that's my mission, and that's the only thing I think about. And we've all got things that are important to us in our life, and stay in the moment. I mean, I know that's another cliche, but it really is true. If we can bring ourselves back to the moment and try not to think about what the future may hold or not hold, and have some faith that whatever happens, we will find resources.
Yeah.
When people are under pressure, they find resources that they didn't know they had.
Well, that sounds like an excellent mission. And huge congratulations again. Obviously, we started this podcast with the good news that you've had, and really hope you get to fulfil that mission as soon as is possible. Steve, thanks so much for coming on Zestology again. We'll record the next one in person. Where can people find out more about you and those blogs that you've been writing over the last few weeks as well? Because I've been getting them all. I've been really enjoying them as well.
Oh, thank you. Well, definitely a link to my website, and maybe if you could put a link to my first one. The first one, I think it should be called Part 1. There's actually 4 in the series. I mean, to be quite honest, those have taken hours and hours of my time, and I wouldn't normally have had time, but I've actually enjoyed doing them. I don't feel that I've done the subject justice, because you can't. These are quite deep things, but I've done my very best to try and make my ideas sort of relatively logical, and for it to flow, and for it to be helpful to other people. And even if it just helps one person, I'd be happy.
Thanks, Steve, and thanks to you for listening. Stay well and stay safe during lockdown. And if you are looking for a little bit of escapism, I did mention the book club. You can check out the book club podcast, which is, well, you'll find it. It's on the podcast feed, and it just looks a little bit different to the other ones. It's a 10-minute podcast, so it's a kind of mini podcast, and I unveil the first book. And I take full responsibility if the book isn't very good. I had a real dilemma as to whether to have, because I love reading, and I love reading fiction as well. So I had a real dilemma as to whether to put the first book on the book club as something that I love, one of my favourite books, or a book that I haven't read so I can read it with fresh eyes. And I've gone for a book that I haven't read so I can read it with fresh eyes. Always a good sign. If it gets to kind of bedtime and you're struggling to put your book down because you're loving it so much, that's normally a good sign that I'm reading a good fiction book, and that was what happened last night. So I'm hoping that I've picked a bit of a blinder, I must say. But if you fancy joining the book club, listen to that podcast, or check out TonyWrighton.com, and the details are on there as well. Have a good week. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll be back with another Zestology next week. And before I go, remember, Bioptimizers, a company that has made it their mission to heal our guts, and I've partnered up with them on today's Zestology. I'm getting into the real industry-leading supplements that they've been providing, and I kind of like to think that I'm a bit of a gut health guinea pig. I've been posting about this on TonyWrighton.com as well, but making my digestion like new is a real challenge, and I've been finding, especially because during lockdown we eat so much. Obviously we've been speaking about it loads, but it's just so hard not to eat. That the mass zymes, that is probably my favourite supplement that they have. You just bosh a couple of those when you're eating, and it seems to kind of help you digest everything quite well. Head to bioptimizers.com/zestology. Use the code zestology10 for 10% off. If you're in the UK, then you can go to bioptimizers.co.uk, and Zestology 10 works there as well. And go for the happy gut and the happy life. Bioptimize. Okay, thanks for listening. Maybe see you over in the book club, and I'll see you next time.